Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just start in a minute, just letting all the attendees in. All right, we can get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all our participants joining us today. And on this occasion of the World Heat Action Day, this is the second webinar in our series on energy transition planning and demand-side management called Power at Peak. The topic for today being more relevant than ever, given the occasion of the World Heat Action Day. DSM programs help manage the demand for cooling by encouraging consumers to shift electricity use away from peak hours, improve energy efficiency, participate in demand response programs, and promote the adoption of energy-efficient cooling technologies. And this is why we are here today with the topic of what is the business case and the regulatory pathways for resource adequacy and demand flexibility, and why DISCOMs should act now. Next slide. So we move on to the webinar with some housekeeping announcements. The webinar will run for 1.5 hours and it is being recorded. The recording will be made available on WRI India's YouTube channel. We request all speakers and participants to remain on mute when not speaking. We also will have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Please use the Q&A chat box to submit your questions during the session. For any feedback or follow-up queries, please write to us at indiaenergy@wri.org. Today's webinar builds on the discussion from webinar 1 and focuses on two critical questions for India's power sector. How can DISCOMs plan for increasing electricity demand? And how can regulatory frameworks enable and accelerate this transition? As India moves towards resource adequacy frameworks, DISCOMs are facing rising peak demand, higher power procurement costs, infrastructure pressures, and the challenge of integrating renewable energy and electric vehicles into the grid. In this context, DSM measures and demand flexibility are emerging as strategic tools to reduce costs, defer infrastructure investments, and support RE integration. Today's discussion will explore peak demand reduction and avoided capacity costs, network deferral benefits, demand flexibility and related regulations, the role of energy-efficient appliance programs, and the integration of these solutions into evolving resource adequacy frameworks. We are delighted to have with us an esteemed panel representing utilities, regulators, and policy experts who will help us unpack these themes from multiple perspectives. But before we begin the panel discussion, a brief introduction to the Energy Transition Preparedness Initiative. ETPI is a collaborative effort by the Prayas Energy Group and the Sustainable Futures Collaborative and WRI India. It uses an indicator-based framework and in-depth case studies to explain state-level transition trends and practices. This research covers 3 energy-intensive sectors: electricity, buildings, and transport, and 10 of India's most energy-intensive states. The indicator framework also includes cross-cutting indicators that track and analyze state-level planning by looking at frontline capacity, institutional coordination, and the approach to a just transition. With that, we are going to move on to our next segment. Can we have the poll, please? All right. So I hope the attendees can see this poll up on their chat. The first question: when did India hit its highest electricity demand? And you get about a few seconds to vote and share your answers. Great. I see some responses coming in. And this will be followed by our next question. Question number 2. Can we have the next question up? Yes. What is the highest recorded electricity peak demand in India? This is something that folks must be familiar with the recent news that we have all been looking at. Great. Few responses coming in there as well. All right. I think these will be the 2 poll questions for now. So in response, just to sort of, let you know the answers as well. India hit its all-time highest peak power demand of 270.8 gigawatts on May 21st, 2026. And as you can see, the responses here are the attendees on the call are quite familiar with this. And let's look at the response to the second question. And on the next question, yes, the peak demand had set a consecutive record for the, I don't see the responses for the second one here. No worries. So on the second question, yes, the peak demand had set consecutive highest records for 4 days in a row that week, 257 on May 18th, 260 on May 19th, and 265 on May 22nd, before peaking at 270.8. The period of intense heat stress was felt across large parts of the country, and it is quite likely that these peak demand numbers are coming from that time period. I am now going to hand it over to my colleague Chandana Sashidharan, a program research fellow at WRI India, to share a summary of the first webinar and also set the context for the webinar today. Over to you, Chandana.
Hi everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the webinar too. So my task here to provide you the background of what is that research we did under ETPI, which provides the context for this webinar one, and also to walk you through how webinar one has helped us plan for webinar two. So as you can see, we started on May 14th. Our first webinar was focused on a time when very energy efficient appliances and demand side management matters now at a time period when India was going through the highest demand. But when we did the first webinar, India had already hit the historical highest peak demand on April 25th, wherein we had crossed 250 plus, and that provided us the background to set our discussion. So what we did is provided a context for the discussion based on our research, and we had an expert set of panelists coming in and providing us perspectives on what is happening in the sector. So to give you a quick recap of webinar one, what we heard a lot from our speakers is the perspective that residential demand is going to be a major concern for India in the coming years, because there is unexpected growth in residential demand, and one of the key contributing factors to it definitely is going to be space cooling, as well as the room air conditioners were mentioned in it. Participating in a webinar, representative from CLASP had talked about their recent survey they have done along with Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Well, they have found that on an average, there is a 13% air conditioning penetration at this point. It also makes us wonder, if we are at 13% and we are able to hit historical highest demands, what will happen in the future as well. Our other panelist, Shweta from Prayas, had actually talked further on this. She talked to elaborate that it is quite possible that when we hit 2030 or even 2040, it's quite possible that a big share of India's peak demand is going to come from space cooling. But our panel also talked about how other appliances, obviously cooling appliances, but also other appliances like cooking appliances that are coming in from the recent geopolitical risks and issues with the oil and gas supply chain. So such loads could also be key contributing factors to peak demand in India. This provided us a good background to emphasize the findings from my research on energy efficient appliances perspective, to tell that energy efficient appliances is very much important to meet to enhance energy efficiency to address the peak demand concerns in our country. This also gave us the narrative to strengthen the call for demand side management. What the panelists started talking about is when the time demand side management had evolved in India, India was actually in a supply demand deficit kind of a situation. Now the situation has changed and we have become a power surplus nation, but we are not just a power surplus nation. We are a power surplus nation wherein a significant share of our power is going to come from renewable energy. Our government has also planned for under its new NDC targets to achieve 60% of installed capacity from renewable energy. This brings attention to the importance of flexible systems, the need for demand flexibility to come in from the demand side as well in a country where there is a rapid adoption of renewable energy for a low carbon power supply. That is a point where demand is also increasing in India, which gives us this perspective of how demand can be treated as a grid resource and how flexible demand can be fixed. So new dimensions are definitely coming up. One of the important thing all the panelists talked about was about how consumers are very important in this chain. Because adoption of energy efficient appliances is very much dependent on consumers, consumer awareness, consumer behavior, consumers' preferences for use of appliances. There are a large perspectives on consumer behavior that is actually going to decide what India's future electricity demand would look like. And one major theme that came out from the discussion as demand and uses are increasing and demand is getting more complex with many variables, there is a need to look at more granular road research that is needed, looking at particular appliances. It could be cooling, it could be cooking, other appliances that is actually needed at the DISCOM level. To set the context for today's session, I want to bring your attention to 4 major takeaways from our case. One of the big ideas that came from our panelists is that we already have the national level schemes coming up for adoption of rooftop solar, such as the PM Suryagar and as well as the PM Kusum scheme for agricultural pumps and rooftop solar adoption. Similarly, there could be a strong case for having a national program for demand side management, and the need of the hour could be that. One major thing we also talked about is that the program needs to be very simple and intuitive. It needs to enable DISCOMs, consumers, and other power sector stakeholders in the ecosystem to easily understand what is the cost and benefit from this ecosystem. And it needs to be designed in such an easy format that everybody is accessible to have to efficient solutions. One of the things I'm hoping today's panel will deliberate further on and tell you more about is the key concerns the DISCOMs actually have. Because whenever an energy efficient appliance is coming in, there is a concern for DISCOMs that they are going to lose on their revenue because there is going to be a reduction in energy sales. So, and that is one of the reasons for why demand side management has been discouraged for intervention from power sector side has been discouraged. I'm very sure the panel will deliberate further on this. Another major point that came up in our discussion is the fact that consumers actually need greater awareness. So consumers are aware of the five-star scheme, the B-star labeling program is what the panelists were talking about. What is needed is, from a cost perspective, it's not just the upfront fund. There is also a life cycle cost perspective for the appliance, which also considers increasing operational cost in a situation where electricity tariffs might be rising. So those were the perspectives our panelists had brought in. Now I'm moving over to set the context for today's discussion, and I'm going to go back to the case study that we did. This was on the DISCOMs initiatives to promote energy efficient appliances. So how we have devised this study is, it is divided into three parts. What all types of energy efficient appliance programs are there? What are the key elements of design? And what are the implementation experiences for this? What we find is there are programs which look at lights and fans and air conditioners, and a large amount of energy efficient appliances that DISCOMs has been promoted has been through the Ujala scheme. In terms of implementation, we are seeing examples where DISCOMs are partnering with agencies like EESL and state designated agencies, and getting into business models where they are engaging with consumers to provide energy efficient appliances. But there are also models where DISCOMs themselves have taken lead in procuring that. We talked about the aspects with respect to financial viability, the rebate, subsidy, manufacturer discount through bulk procurement and non-bill financing and other aspects. We talked about challenges as well as how energy efficiency consideration has been part of the implementation. For example, how fan programs were very different from light programs, and challenges with AC programs and things like that. So this is what today's discussion will focus on. We know that mostly whenever we see a DSM program that is reported, in an easy way, we see savings mostly reported in terms of units or kilowatt hour or units, but not many examples where peak demand reduction or transmission and distribution loss reduction has been reported. One exception to this could be the Delhi DISCOMs, who have actually undertaken a few efforts, but there is still a lack of standardization on how reporting can be done very much for DSM programs against the savings of capacity vis-a-vis savings in terms of the megawatts and the units. One more thing that will guide the discussion today is the fact that when the demand side regulations happened in India, we know long back, like in 2010s, we almost all states right now have the demand side management regulations, and a few states like Maharashtra and Haryana actually has also regulations to look at cost effectiveness of DSM programs. But what we see from a new perspective is the fact that we know the resource adequacy framework is something that is new, that is happening in our system right now. This is what is addressing the requirement for a future power system to operate to meet its demand in the most cost optimal way, considering renewable energy, also considering not just additional generation, but also sources like energy storage and even flexible demand. And a lot of states, I think 18 plus states, already have their state resource adequacy framework regulations that are brought into the picture. What we also see is this demand flexibility related regulations that are coming in. These are the new age demand side regulations coming in. In Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Rajasthan seems to be the leading states who are thinking about new ways of flexible demand, thinking of concepts like demand flexibility, portfolio obligations. So these are ideas that we have panelists joining us from the state. These are ideas that they will be sharing with us. Finally, to set the context, I'm going to hand it over back to Sumedha at this point. So two things that today's discussion will focus on is to how to recognize capacity savings from demand side management programs, and what is that enabling ecosystem that is created by the new regulatory framework. I will stop sharing now, Sumedha, and back to you.
Thanks, Chandana. And we will go into our panel discussion now that Chandana has provided us an overview of what we are expecting to cover during our panel discussion. I will introduce our panelists, requesting them to switch on their videos. Our first panelist is Ms. Deepti Mathur, who's a superintending engineer at the Jaipur Vidyut Vitran Nigam Limited, JVVNL. She's a seasoned power sector professional with decades of experience across energy efficiency and renewable energy. She has played a key role in advancing clean energy and sustainability initiatives in Rajasthan, particularly on the implementation of DSM programs. We are very happy to have you, ma'am. My next panelist is Sajan Ismail, who's with the Kerala State Electricity Board. Sajan is an assistant engineer, innovation and specialist EV cell in KSEB, where he currently specializes in electric vehicles. He has been instrumental in advancing KSEB's initiatives around grid planning for EV integration, RE synergies, and broader sustainable energy transition efforts in Kerala. Thanks, Sajan, for joining. And our next panelist is Ravindra Kadam from the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, where he's a distinguished power sector expert at CERC, which is India's apex electricity regulatory body, with deep expertise in regulatory frameworks, tariff formulation, and market design. He has contributed significantly to shaping policies that support India's clean energy goals. Thanks, sir. Then Ms. Anne Jose from Prayas Energy Group. Anne is a specialist in the electricity sector policy and regulation ecosystem at both the national and state levels. Her work focuses on distribution company finances, tariff and subsidy design, power procurement, planning, and advancing consumer-centric approaches within India's energy transition. Pleased to have you, Anne. And our friend and colleague Mahesh Patankar, who's the founder and MD of MPN Systems Advisory. He has more than 35 years of experience working with regulators and utilities on DSM and power sector reforms. And he has been a leading voice in demand flexibility and has been actively contributing to frameworks that enable utilities to transition towards more dynamic and consumer-centric grid management. To moderate this really interesting and passionate group of people on this panel, I'm inviting my colleague Puneet Khandelwal, who's the program head, utilities and finance at the energy team in WRI India. Puneet works extensively on clean energy transitions and utility-focused energy planning initiatives with a strong focus on enabling sustainable and resilient power systems. Handing it over to you, Puneet, to moderate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumedha. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So we will proceed with the panel discussion. So I thank you, Channa, for setting the context for today's discussion. We welcome our distinguished panelists and thank them and other participants who are joining us today. So as we now can safely conceive that the managing demand, not only the rising demand as well as the overall the shift in demand or emerging demand which is coming has become a pivotal point in India's power sector. And we have also understood that it's not only to solve the problem of the demand is not only to add the more and more supply, but the relevance of the demand side management and the demand flexibility has been growing importance. We have an excellent mix of experts representing utilities, practitioners, and policy researchers. And I hope it will be a very valuable discussion and will provide valuable insights and practical takeaways for utilities, regulators, and power sector regulators. For audience, I would request that whenever they get a question, they keep posting the questions in the chat, and we will be taking up the selected questions at the end of the panel discussion. So, starting with, I would request Deepti ma'am's attention, and I just wanted to discuss. JVVNL, we know, has been among the utilities that have actively implemented energy efficiency and DSM initiatives over the years. Though I understand that the initial phase of this particular DSM cell activities have been limited and that kind of limited visibility was there, but now it is growing traction and more attention is driven, given that right now Rajasthan is also witnessing rapid growth in electricity demand, particularly during peak periods. The heat wave which we are observing is making us to achieve more and more the higher peaks over the period. So drawing from Jaipur DISCOMs experiences, what have been some of the key lessons she has observed in these DSM programs, and which kind of interventions have delivered, and what are the key learnings, if she could share with all of us?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for
Ma'am,
inviting me to this. Am I audible?
your voice is coming.
You're audible.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am, it's coming. Yeah, please.
yeah. Um, so the question is related to what we have already done in demand side management and what we propose to do. Basically, see the earlier years of demand side management, the last I think the last decade, and even prior to that, we have been working for demand side management, but I think that concept of energy efficiency and demand side management was that is not quite relevant to what is happening today. And as you already put up the first question to the panel, this to the audience, that when the peak we had reached a peak, and right now we are sitting in at least in Rajasthan, where the peak demand has really crossed around 17,300 this megawatts. So, and we are struggling with the evening peak, which is coming around 8 o'clock. So earlier, what we did, the measures we had taken were basically consumer centric, and those measures like just replacing your LEDs or the agriculture pumps, and they were just they were very attractive until the consumers had the benefit of zero at zero cost they were to buy, and then it was included in their bills, and the payback was very easy. And so in general, there was LED era, I think that has already finished a long time back. So of course those were the very beginning periods of DSM and energy efficiency, and it worked well. But now seeing at the today's scenario, when especially when you had pointed out that the main peak to the domestic consumers is coming out of their ACs, and as such, I think many of you must have gone through the study done by the Berkeley University recently, where they said that by 2030, around 10 to 15 million, ACs will be added throughout India, and that would lead to an abnormal 65 gigawatt of peak demand during that time. So now I think energy efficiency and demand flexibility and demand response, they should be married together. So it's not only, they cannot be treated individually. So now right now, and when the RDSM regulations are now in place, so we now, and with the RDSS and the smart meter data, we very clearly now, and the DT metering, we have a very clear granular level study where we can go for demand side management and demand response, especially demand response and demand flexibility. So what now we are planning and proposing to do is the demand response, ADR programs, automated demand response, and demand flexibility programs, because there's individually energy efficiency alone or demand side management just cutting off, asking people to put off their appliances. That is, we have to now dynamically orchestrate all these flexible loads with the grid stable, in order to make the grid stable. And we have come up, of course, very you see the Rajasthan is a state where we have solar in surplus, and the duck curves already explains it in the during the afternoon times. Now we really have to even curtail our this solar power. So that is also creating a huge cry. Like on 27th, there was a around, we had surplus of 18,000. We had 18,000 megawatt power, where our load was not that much in the afternoon, but during the evening, when we had the load, our this generation was just 16,500 megawatts. So that is a difference. Like that is main reason that how do we meet our evening peak. So, and I think demand flexibility and demand response are the two areas where we can do, and we are actively doing a pilot right now for the demand this response, ADR, automated demand response for air conditioners. So that has already begun, and then and we'll be doing it at very granular level, so that we can find that what is the load that is being reduced at a DT level. And I'm now with that the role of demand aggregator and everything is in place. regulation is in place. So this is now a very win-win situation for utility like JVVNL. So I can give you more details on it later, but I think there are a number of panelists, so we should go ahead with them as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
I would like now bring attention of Sir Ravindra Kadam, sir. Sir, India is, as we all know, India is witnessing record peak demand growth alongside rapid RE integration, making system flexibility, reliability as an increasingly important parameters to consider. CARC has been driving several market-based reforms, including ancillary services and market-based mechanisms to support the grid operations and to support the system. From your perspective, how do you see the role of these resource adequacy frameworks, ancillary services market, and emerging capacity adequacy mechanisms are evolving to help, especially utilities, to how to address this future peak demand reliably and cost effectively?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Puneet. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this panelist. Of course, just a small disclaimer. I am working with CRC as a senior advisor in renewable energy, and most of the views which I will be sharing for today's webinar would be my individual view, should not be considered the views of the commission. So yes, uh, uh, I think my previous speakers have already touched upon the need and the importance of the flexibility as far as the DISCOM is concerned, and overall for the portfolio management. And from a CRC point of view, central regulatory commissions are generally involved into the interstate generation, interstate basically transmission and the generation of electricity. We don't have as such a direct DISCOMs or I would say a consumers, a section of consumers with whom we have direct this relation. But of course, CRC has another role, another hat, I would say, through forum of regulators, which also have which consist of all the chairpersons of the state regulatory commissions, and during which we do come across the different issues which are directly affecting the consumers, and of course the issues which are very much linked with the distribution companies and the distribution network. I think the demand flexibility is another such, or demand flexibility is one such topics on which the CRC, since being part of that whole process, have also understand the kind of a role which being the central regulators can provide as of guiding principles. And as a part of that, whenever there has been such kind of a transition happening, this the commission has tried to reflect those sentiments through their provisions. And I think as a part of that, the CRC the CRC was revising their IEGC, electricity grid code, for the Indian electricity grid code. I think with that time we specifically tried to enable the resource adequacy framework, which at that time was discussed at the policy level. We tried to enable it through our grid code to make sure that it will be also not only will be discussed at the planning level, but also will become a part and parcel of a regulatory system. And we didn't stop there. We also tried to build a hand-holding support for the states by coming out with a model state resource adequacy regulations through our forum of regulator, which I think, as the earlier speakers did mention, that more than 18 states have already adopted that framework. And we are hoping, of course, we are still building on that resource adequacy framework. There is lot to be done on this, especially considering that we have a lot more distribution licenses to actually implement that framework with the spirit, and at the same time also achieve what is expected in that resource adequacy framework. And from that point of view, I think the CRC had done a couple of things, and which I would like to highlight just as an initial response to this response. As resource adequacy framework, while actually formulating that model regulations, there was been a deliberation happened among the regulators about how to include the demand response also part of an integral part of that resource adequacy structures. And while the regulators might establish or while pressure or would like to expect the obligated entity to submit their resource adequacy plan, how the demand response or the demand flexibility can also become an integral part of that process of filing the submission before the regulatory commission. And it was with that point of view, I think the resource adequacy has been framed and defined in such a way that the demand response and the demand flexibility can become an inherent part of that whole process. At the same time, while at the CRC level or at the interstate level, we do talk about most of the time the generation flexibility and the flexibility from the generation point of view. But I think the importance of such kind of a webinar is really important, is really interesting because with more and more demand, with more and more energy, which is going to happen in the next as we develop more and more, we need to also understand that key instead of just only depending on the supply side of the resources to meet the demand, we also need to be optimized our demand in such a way that demand flexibility or the demand response can also become an option, better options, because as we all know, adding more and resources are much costlier than actually using the demand flexibility as a measures to manage your system demand effectively. At the same time, I think as an ancillary services, the CRC did enable again the demand response as a resource, a special resource identified, recognized in the ancillary services to make sure that that demand response can also participate to provide the ancillary services, whether it is a tertiary services, secondary services, and primary services. But I must say, and I must admit, that there has not been significant improvement, even though it has been enabled in the ancillary service regulations, I think 2-3 years back. And I think the need is there to basically create that kind of a pilot, a successful pilot, with which we can actually participate this demand response kind of schemes, successfully participating in the ancillary services to provide the relief into the system. While on another hand, we have this peak, we are meeting the peak demand. I think we all know, and by my previous speaker again have highlighted that on one side we do have trying to meet our increased demand, but there has been a lot of backing down of a resource like wind and source happening into the systems, which is basically nothing but a effectively almost zero marginal generator. You are allowing to you are asking them to back down, and it's going forward. I think it's not going to basically prove any economical for the systems, because eventually, while we are there has not been much of a demand from the RE generators. The reason behind that, because the demand, the schedule of those RE generators has been fulfilled by some other resources, and they have been paid for that backing down instructions as an under emergency condition of ancillary services. But I think going forward, we have to understand that it's basically nothing but a vestige of resources like wind and solars, and that's for that I think a flexible, not only the flexible resources into the system is required, but at the same time the flexibility from the demand side is also going to be very critical. And I think given the kind of emphasis are there now on the demand response, eventually we will have some kind of a business case which is possible for the regulators to actually assess the effectiveness of the demand response schemes in the near future. Yeah, this is my initial response. We can add something more.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I would now like to bring attention of Sajin, who is from KSEB Limited. Sajin, we know that Kerala has one of the fast-growing electricity demand profiles in the country, driven by the cooling demand as well as the rapid adoption of the electric vehicles. So, as a utility, what are the key challenges KSEBL is facing in managing this changing demand profile? How is the utility demand side measures and smart changing approaches to ensure this particular EV growth supports rather than the stresses the grid? If you can share some insights on that.
Thank you. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. See, Kerala is witnessing a significant transformation in its electric demand profile. That is true because traditionally the entire consumer base was residential consumers, almost 80%. But now there has been a drastic shift in that. Mostly the cooling loads, like you said. During the last summer, we already hit more than 6,000 megawatt of peak demand and 117 million unit per day. So that is kind of a very high demand. It's mostly been contributed by, of course, the air conditioners and the digitalization and commercial growth. At the same time, the new segment that has been emerging in Kerala, that is electric mobility. From the last 5 to 6 years, I'm in the electric mobility segment associated with the infrastructure development of Kerala state. So where we are seeing significant growth of electric vehicles is there, but still, when it comes to the consumption pattern, it may not be that high, or a very big percentage of the consumption that is actually happening across the day. Because last month when I checked from the public charging infrastructure, the monthly consumption is around 2.5 million units per month. So it may be 3 or 4 times from the domestic use cases also. That is not very odd. But still, the situation is, and considering the present situation in the country and the oil crisis and all, the way the trajectory of the growth of electric vehicles is going to be pretty high, and that is going to create a very new problem that the DISCOMs have not faced. There is no such historical data that is available, how demand is going to increase and how it is actually going to behave. There are a lot of challenges that we could expect from the electric vehicle front. And of course, Kerala is struggling with the peak demand management because we are always being dependent on the power from other states, because we have our limitation of the energy sources inside the state with only conventional hydroelectric power, and there is obviously demand side. The distributed energy source like solar has been heavily been added to this, especially the rooftop solar. But again, what we are thinking here is in proactive sense, electric vehicle have this potential of we can actually defer this load. It is not like it has to be used at a very particular time. So this particular load has its flexible nature that can be well utilized. That is something that we are really working on. So whether we can actually come up with incentives and last proposed regulations on the renewables, Kerala State Electricity Regulatory Commission has proposed for vehicle to grid a particular rate also, per unit rate, if you are sending back to the grid. But it has not been implemented. We have started working on the vehicle to grid possibilities so that these vehicles can be considered as large-scale storages, at least in the domestic level, so that this kind of power, we have enough power at the daytime through solar, but that is not well being utilized. Can be integrated with the EV charging stations, or can we store it in the batteries so that they can use it and self-sufficient during the night and do not disturb the grid too much. And these aspects we are trying to work out, and we already are working with institutions like WRI also on the grid integrations of EV charging infrastructure aspects. And similarly, we are figuring out whether we can do some pilots on the vehicle to grid program that actually implement it once the vehicles with V2G capabilities are onboarded to the customers. And we already have an MOU with IIT Bombay for doing a pilot. And we are in the initial stage of analysis of the distribution system, how good the vehicle to grid system can actually be placed and where it has to be placed in a pilot stage, and how that can actually be considered as a potential in case of an ancillary services or any kind of grid support device in the future. Or apart from that, basically, see this. The demand will keep on increasing. It is the same situation in every state, not just in Kerala. So, and coming, everything is moving to electric, and there is something that is coming bigger than that is green hydrogen. That is very much a power dependent thing. So the demand will obviously be rising, and the challenge is whether if we don't have the sufficient resources or new generations are generating stations are not there. At the same time, the demand side management, basically, if you can shift the power that is available at one time to another time and utilize it and manage it with smart charging facilities and consumer awareness, something that we are really working on the consumer awareness part, where we have already induced time of the day tariff for the EV charging infrastructure, where solar hours have a specific rate and very low rate, and non-solar hours is having very high rate, so that we are focusing this integration of this renewable power, that is solar power available in the daytime, be well utilized by the EV owners, so that we don't have to depend them like on the very costly power during the peak hours. So like that, objective is to ensure that the growth of electric mobility is well aligned with the grid reliability, renewable energy integration, and long-term resource adequacy planning. So in the future, what we are thinking that EV will become or will play a major role like battery energy storage in managing the grid rather than putting it as a challenge. So that's my viewpoint on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajin. I would now move to Mahesh Patankar, sir. Sir, we understand that with your extensive experience on working on the demand side management programs, and you have relevant experience with multiple utilities across India, and you have actually closely observed their evolution over the years. So, looking what are the important lessons from the utility DSM initiative? I understand Deepti ma'am and Sajin has covered some of the experience of Rajasthan and Kerala. Based on your experience, have recent programs which have been introduced and pilots are able to demonstrate any measurable benefits as what we were envisaging at the beginning of the context setting, and such as peak reduction, avoided power procurement cost, deferred network investments, or other any utility value streams do you observe?
So, thank you. Thanks a lot, Sunil, for this question, and thank you, WRI India team, for inviting me along with such an esteemed list of panelists. So, let me start with sort of some fact checks. Despite the fact that we have had some DSM regulations, right from 2010 was the first notified regulation in the state of Maharashtra. And subsequently, FOR came up with the model regulations, and almost all the states, except for one or two from the Northeast, now already have notified demand side management regulations. But we actually have, really speaking, scratched the surface. We have not been able to do sort of a great amount of measurable demand side management, which would actually result in reduction in substantial cost towards power procurement. There is also a very interesting nuance wherein we have seen most of the public utilities in India have been a bit of a laggard in implementing demand side management. But at the same instance, we have states like Delhi and Maharashtra, West Bengal, where we have some private utilities, and those private utilities have been able to roll out programs for appliance replacements, at the same time, even for demand response at a sub-level. There is also another fact check, which is while some of us already have been involved in setting up the benefit cost analysis frameworks for demand side management investments by the DISCOMs, we seem to be applying similar metric to a CapEx proposal that would come to a regulator from DISCOM. And what I'm referring to here is there are thousands of crores of investments that happen in capital expenditure towards sub-distribution and distribution network expansion. But at the same instance, if we apply, really speaking, similar tariff impact analysis on the DSM efforts, I think we are actually have like a very different scale of efforts for which we are applying very similar metrics. So I think there has to be some kind of a guardrails.
Sir, your voice is coming very low. Can you
okay.
adjust your mic?
Is this better? Is this better?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay, apologies for this technical glitch. So, yeah, so I was making a point wherein the public versus private DISCOMs and their ability to implement DSM is something is to be seen. In terms of measurable impacts, we haven't really seen measurable impacts which would result in reduction in the power procurement cost. It has happened in case of certain efforts such as those by some private discoms in Maharashtra as well as Delhi and Kolkata. There is also another fact check which is bothers some of us the most, which is revenue loss perception of demand side management efforts, especially if implemented with commercial and industrial consumers, is actually a no-go situation for most of the discoms. So they feel the entity which is able to implement demand side management, such as the consumers from the CNI consumer base, if they start reducing their consumption, there is a revenue loss, and which is despite the fact that it's going to be trued up at the end of the year or end of the tariff setting cycle, that is definitely a challenge, a real challenge faced by them. And that's why we have seen quite a few public discoms and private discoms in certain cases as well, really differing demand side management rollouts. So thanks to Ujala and some of the other market transformation programs, wherein we have seen a lot of energy efficiency market transformation projects implemented, but we have not really seen a substantial amount of benefits coming from the demand side management. And as was mentioned earlier in the session, the load is growing. We're going to have 10 to 15 million air conditioners, and it's going to be a catch-up game to believe that only energy efficiency would solve the problem. And that's where we have now shifting the narrative from merely demand side management to demand flexibility. And I would probably talk about that a bit later during the session itself. But just to give like a flavor, now the narrative rightfully is changing from energy efficiency, demand side management, demand response alone to something that we are now calling as demand flexibility. When there is abundant low cost renewable energy available during the daytime, and if there are any ways to increase the consumption by taking advantage of some of the tariff that we see in states like Maharashtra, where there is a 20% rebate between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and there is a penalty or increase in the tariff by 25% during the evening peak. That's where the entire narrative is now seem to be shifting, and a few end users such as electric vehicle charging infrastructure for buses, public water works, lift irrigation schemes are now able to sort of solve and take advantage of that. So we'll be happy to talk about some specific numbers and examples from the Maharashtra initiatives as we go along. But I'll pause for the time being. Over to you. Thank you, Punitji. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I would now go back to and so thanks for your patience, and there is a deliberately why I'm coming to you last, because what we have heard is we have heard the executors and we have heard the policymakers as well as the regulators, and now from the independent researcher lens, I would like to we know that your work over the years has focused extensively on utility finances, power procurement planning, consumer-centric electricity sector reforms. So, as electricity demand continues to rise across these states, what are the key short-term and long-term implications for DISCOM finances? Where do you see the biggest challenges emerging out of this relevant discussion, please?
Yeah, I think after hearing all the perspectives, I can also take a slightly broader picture. As you had mentioned, I mean, DISCOMs are at the center of this. 70% of their cost is due to power procurement, and 80%, 50 to 80% of their current borrowings are actually for working capital purposes. They are not for investment in capital network, to invest in their capital networks. So in capital investment. So therefore, the most of it goes towards power purchase, even their borrowing, right? So that becomes a very major aspect of their finances. And even the cost that distribution companies incur sees significant seasonal variation. So what I want to highlight is, many of these things that we're talking about, reduction in peak demand, demand side management, these are not new concepts. We have been talking, about this. Sector actors have also been trying to implement it, and this whole issue of where is the business case for distribution companies has been coming up again and again. But one major thing that has changed, which Mahesh has also alluded to, is the fact that increase in solar penetration and the kind of investment that we're seeing for solar procurement by distribution companies and other sector actors has resulted in a lot of changes in the system itself. So we see a very sharp difference in the cost between solar and non-solar hours. And that marginal cost difference itself creates a very, very clear business case. And that's where even resource adequacy really plays a big role, because even within a 5-year to 7-year timeline, what we clearly see is peak demand is not the same as when you have peak costs, right? So what is more important is when is your net peak? Because that's when your non-solar generators, your coal generators, which have higher marginal costs, are the ones that are generating. So clearly, when is your net peak, and is there a potential for reducing your net peak, becomes a real question there. And then, so the question is not really about how high is my peak demand. The question is, when is my net peak demand coming, and at what cost? And that should be the real question that those who are looking at demand side programs should be answering. So the larger point that I'm making is, when we talk about from a distribution company perspective, cost compensation is as important as load shifting. Load shifting is possible to a certain extent. Most loads are inflexible, but at least if they are using particular resources or particular services of the distribution company should have the price signals to charge for the cost that they're incurring at least. And currently, we don't even see that happening in many states. So Mahesh did talk a little bit about time of day tariff signals in Maharashtra, but even since the notification of the time of day tariff rules in 2023, we see that progress is happening in states, but it's not happening at the pace that it should in order to ensure cost compensation. And to me, that's a very low-hanging fruit, because now we see that metering infrastructure is also in place in many states. The cost of ensuring TOD-enabled meters is also much lower, at least for 10 to 20 kilowatt and above consumers. So ensuring that time of day tariffs are levied, they're reflective of the cost variations across the day and across seasons is a very easy way, one, to ensure cost compensation, and where possible, give the right signals for shifting. Again, Mahesh mentioned the example of Maharashtra, about 25%. But I think Sajan will agree with me that actually the example of Kerala is much more stark, because they're able to give the right price signals for time of day tariffs. We are talking about a 3 rupee differential, at least in cost, because the TOD tariff is one of the highest in the country, which is 50% of your energy charges or more. Sajan can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think those are the kind of examples and innovations that we can think about from a tariff design perspective. The other aspect is about load shifting. I mean, classically, the whole idea is will certain load shift, but the structure of the industry has also changed quite significantly, because loads may not just shift from one time to another. Load can also shift from a DISCOM to open access or captive or other models, depending on the price. So we really need to account for that. The third is about, the joker in the pack, as everyone says, is storage. And now that is also another way where, loads can actually be shifted, where you're using storage as a resource, at least for large loads. And that can only come up when you have adequate price signals. So we really need to think about what kind of mechanisms we're going to have for smaller consumers and incentives for smaller consumers to sort of shift loads and larger consumers, because they're going to be very different, because right now we're going to have significant large loads also coming up in the sector, which probably DISCOMs have to cater to, and the strategies for them have to be very different. And there, I think, at least for smaller consumers, traditional energy efficiency programs, DISCOM-led energy efficiency programs can also have a lot of value. And they have seen a lot of change, and some of these DSF programs can also make a big difference. Last point I wanted to bring about was definitely resource adequacy is very critical, but we should also take a larger picture in terms of how do we really look at planning. This is the kind of demand growth that's happening. Can we think about planning also in a very decentralized manner? One of the things that, with WRI we have looked at as part of the ETPI project is also to see what kind of capex plans are coming up with utilities which are also looking at circle level changes? Because if you understand load, I mean, the last webinar talked about load surveys and understanding residential and other demands much better. How do we really look at augmenting networks at a circle level where loads are growing? How do we look at generation, embedded generation also coming up within these sectors, particularly with Kusum and other programs, which is another form of demand side management, which we can talk about later. And of course, along with circle-wise planning, how are we looking at supply and service quality indicators, or very critical things that come up in terms of like DT failure rates? Are they feeding into the capex plan? Are they feeding into the repair and maintenance plan or preventive maintenance plans that DISCOMs are having? I think all these aspects also become very critical as we look at demand, rising heat, also making a big difference. And I think they all should be considered in terms of how DSM programs, understanding demand, can also inform the larger planning of the distribution company. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there's some relevant points on the circle level means network planning you have shared. So I will just do a time check. What time? Yeah, okay. So I would request I will ask short questions, and maybe I request panelists to be precisely answer in 2 minutes due to the paucity of time we have. So Deepti ma'am, again I would a follow-up question to your first response to the discussion point is that can you elaborate more on this auto DR program for the benefit for all of us? Yes.
Yeah, we have with the Flock Energy and Octopus Energy combined, we have taken up this automated demand response program for around 2,000 AC households, domestic households. So we have started, calling them. First step is we give them a call and ask that if they are willing to join this automated demand response program. We are even distributing flyers and all these materials. So, and then the flyer states that you will be getting a cash reward every day if you enroll in this program. So it's like we'll be getting the peak signal, this demand from SLDC. And if we're just doing it in a Jaipur city, so, and now and especially we are taking all the smart meter consumers and the DT, where the DT has been metered. So we'll be specifically able to calculate what was the real load reduction, because otherwise it's just it's a drop in an ocean. Just 2,000 consumers, if you take even 1-2 degree temperature, they have got a device which it's a non-intrusive device that sticks on the AC. So, and it's connected to the Wi-Fi. So taking the consent of the consumer is very important. So you don't have to chip off anything and put that device there. It just sticks on that AC, even if it's a window AC, and then we can give the signaling whenever we know that in the evening our peak will be coming up. And so then we can just automatically we can reduce their temperature by 1 or 2 degree. So that itself, of course, for 2,000 ACs, it will be just a drop in the ocean, and we'll be getting around we are planning to go for 1 megawatt this peak demand reduction. So this is one. Another, we are also doing doing a pilot for this mobile towers who have got their own batteries. So we are doing it with Polaris. So now they can charge their batteries during the daytime, during the solar hours. Of course, then as it has been mentioned, this TOU and TOD tariff is in place in Rajasthan for above 10 kilowatt, even domestic consumers. So, and now with the smart meter in place, this is being implemented. So they'll charge their batteries during the daytime, and in the evening they will, like a virtual power plants, they'll be supplying it to the grid. And also for the electric vehicles, not for the big residential societies where they have got their own charging points, or even some charging stations. We are planning to do the demand flexibility program. We'll ask them that if they can charge their electric vehicles during the daytime or even in the nights, so that that is what we are planning to do. But AC program has already been commenced, and this is soon going to start the program. So our major shift will be there, so that our even of course battery storages and all these will come in place. But now Rajasthan has so much of Kusum, so and now we have a load flow study done. We have a real-time load flow digital twin in place, so we can very easily, we are connecting that to the demand uh, flexibility program and the demand response program. So at each transformer DT level, we know what the load is, and real-time load. So that is a big help to us, and we plan to reduce our infrastructure cost that way, and hopefully when it goes for a large scale, put it up for the tariff petition in the next tariff petition, and we can even reduce our infrastructure cost and in turn the tariff for the consumers. So that is which we are really working on.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Quickly, Ravindra sir, from the regulatory perspective, what changes are needed in India, especially when we want to enable greater integration of demand side resources into resource adequacy and the system planning frameworks?
Oh, interesting. So I think, as I was mentioning, and if I was mentioning earlier in my response, if I would like to extrapolate the same discussion, what I generally believe that this whole for demand response, the key point is also a framework. What I observed while actually deliberating on these issues at different forum is that key while allow to actually effectively utilize this demand flexibility or the demand response, the framework of aggregator is missing right now, I think, in the country. Of course, as the speaker mentioned, the DISCOM can play a role of an aggregator and actually utilize that resources for the demand side resources to provide that kind of flexibility into the system. But at the same time, apart from the DISCOMs, which again would be an issue of whether public DISCOMs or the private DISCOMs. So I think there has to be a clear-cut framework need to be in place as a third party aggregators maybe wants to come ahead and actually create that kind of a resources demand responses possible into the systems, and the participation of those resources through the aggregator is, I think, kind of an enablement the regulator can think going forward. We have actually discussed a lot about how the role of aggregators will eventually would play a very critical role for this demand response, to enable this demand response. But I think there has hardly been any much happened on that front. Of course, for the RE generator from the supply sides, we had QCA, we had appointed QCA, the qualified coordinate agency to actually manage the deviations for the wind source. But the similar kind of a framework for aggregators, with clarity of that aggregators and how that aggregator is different from any other entities, whether it's a trader or any other DISCOMs, how it is different, how it has basically can have a handshake with the either utility or the consumers, and what are those roles and the functions that aggregator would play under the existing regulatory framework is, I think, not clear in many states, and maybe that is the kind of a challenge we have to actually make this demand response further more effective in the coming period. And at the same time, I think, as I think earlier my speakers did mention about actual monitoring of this demand response is also very critical, and how to create that baseline so that eventually the kind of the measurement of such programs are managed or have been evaluated. It has been evaluated in a much more scientifically, rather than basically having that free rider problems most on such kind of a demand response. So these are the two challenges and the concerns which I believe will have to be addressed while addressing the resource adequacy concerns or the resource adequacy framework through the demand response flexibility.
Thank you, sir. Sajin, so as Anne has rightly mentioned that Kerala has introduced some TOU related initiatives, and there's a recent recommendation on dynamic electricity pricing for households also in Kerala, which has been recommended. At the same time, the state is witnessing rapid growth in distributed energy resources. How do you see these regulatory and market developments supporting demand flexibility in Kerala, and what role they can play in improving the grid management while enabling higher RE integration?
Yeah. Actually, but our objective is mostly to make the consumer come out from its passive state. Being just a consumer, he'll get a monthly bill. He don't even understand what he's been charged for. Apart from that, being like a party to the grid, like he will also understand what time, what tariff he is having, so that he will have an idea when you should actually put more appliances into running, or when electricity has to be used based on the time of the tariff. They should be aware of it. And another thing that we are trying to bring on is the community level battery energy storage systems. That's something that we're really working on. And the government's new vision by 2031, one of the major things we are actually focusing on is the energy storage. That is a domestic level, because you already talked about the decentralized solar generation that is widely available in the state, because we are one of the top states in the country with the PM Surya solar addition. But the problem is again that power, how that can be well utilized by the households and for the grid. Most of the time, what happens is if they are generating at daytime and it's not being well used in the local area itself, because the kind of demand may not be there. So that's why we are thinking about bringing a policy where battery energy storage for households, especially like a rooftop solar system. So with incentivized system where anybody who is setting up a solar plant at home should have a storage system also, so that and that should be financially viable for them. That should be attractive for them. That should be technically good for the grid also. So that's something that we are really looking for, and make the consumer part of the ecosystem so that he can actually contribute rather than being a passive consumer. So that is something regulatory commission is also very much keen to bring a lot of points like virtual net metering, community level storage systems. So a lot of things are actually running, and most importantly, like we discussed earlier, the time of the use tariff is something that we are putting very much into action now, so that the consumer will be more available. He should be able to know and understand what is the actual scenario that is running the state. And further, when it comes to EV, another interesting fact that we have seen is we have changed the time of use tariff. For solar hours, we kept 5 rupees as the energy tariff, and non-solar hours is 9.3 rupees. But the interesting fact, when we checked some of the private charging stations and most utilized stations, the story is the usage is there in the non-solar hours. It's some very good charging stations, the usage is very high, even though we are keeping it a very high price. Because what we understand is that transportation is a very interesting segment, because the primary concept of transportation is to travel, and you will only consider to charge the vehicle based on your necessity. So that is something we cannot change much in the public charging infrastructure, and we are also studying the impact of that. So what exactly is happening, even though we put twice the amount of money in there, but people's convenience is something that they won't be able to change. So that's why another vision statement given by the government is to integrate every public charging station to the locally distributed solar storage. Solar. And at the same time, too, battery energy storage system should be integrated with the charging station. So that's something how well we can do. This is something that we are working on. So these are the things that I would like to mention, and something that we are also planning is on to understand how we are doing the smart metering process now. All the government institutions and high tension consumers are now being mapped into smart metering. And in same way, one of our visionary point is to understand the EV charging infrastructure load also from the domestic perspective, also to get every data point to a centralized system. As a data center, we are trying to get the data and real-time understanding of how the charging is happening, how much power is being consumed from 24/7. Now we have the system for our charging stations. Now we are trying to bring a policy where we'll get every data. Like DISCOM should have all these data so that DISCOM is having a very clear understanding today, tomorrow, and with that analytics, and we can go ahead with the planning along with that. So similar aspect also we are trying with the smart metering. So the problem with smart metering is we are in the preliminary stage only. Once we have achieved that with analytics, we'll have a better understanding, and the consumer should actually play a pivotal role in understanding the tariff and understanding the grid system and be a part of it, either by contributing it or either by changing his use patterns. That's what the total regulatory aspect of Kerala state also. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajin sir. And I will come to you and very specifically, do these emerging resource adequacy and demand flexibility frameworks provide an opportunity to change the narrative which we have been discussing and we are envisaging for future?
Sorry, what is the narrative?
The narrative of these programs contributing to the point of managing the demand, the emerging as well as the regular demand. Yes.
Right. So, okay, again, to step back a little bit, the whole definitely demand side management, demand flexibility programs. I think, Mahesh should have gone before me to talk about some of the things that have anyway there in many of the DF programs, which really allow for a lot of sandboxing and a lot of experimentation by DISCOMs to understand what's possible. But I would just like to say that there is definitely potential. And I just like to quote a study that has been done by my colleagues Shweta Aditya and Srihari. Because of demand side management programs, particularly in the industry as well as the agricultural sectors, the peak demand, through production cost modeling, we could show that would reduce by about 13% in Gujarat, 10% in Madhya Pradesh, which leads to a savings of 8,000 crores. And in Gujarat, and a 3,300 crore saving in Madhya Pradesh. So there is definitely potential. It is not something that is a revenue loss proposition for the utilities, because it definitely does reduce power procurement costs itself. So it can be seen as a cost reduction measure as well, particularly given that there is very, very significant variation in power procurement costs. But how are these programs going to be designed? How are they going to be smart? How are they really going to target cost reduction? That is the critical question. Therefore, DR really is interesting, particularly for smaller consumers, because you're declaring those events in advance and you're asking for participation. So you're declaring when you want that cost reduction. The other aspect that I wanted to focus on was that definitely we need to first understand what's happening, because how elastic is these demands in India, how do they vary with different load shapes, make a big difference. And I think in the whole demand side conversation, we hardly ever differentiate between large consumers and small consumers. Forget about different categories. Let's just do away with that concept of categories. I think large and small itself as groups behave as flexible and inflexible demands. And also it matters because how responsive are they to prices? How responsive are they to price signals? In my mind, much larger consumers, probably high tension consumers, what one strategy could be to not have any DSM programs for them, just have really good price signals. If the price signals are good enough, then they will definitely ensure that they take care of DSM measures, because they can invest in enough capital investment, and you can bring in a lot of innovation in that as well, because then many other entities can also play significant roles. But for smaller consumers, I think definitely utilities have to play a very significant role. There is a business case already, because many of these consumers are paying at less than cost of supply. So it's not like there is revenue compensation in any case. In many cases, there's also potential for subsidy reduction. So I think ensuring very good targeted programs from the utility side is very critical, rather than pricing measures, because they're obviously not going to work. And the third is, how are we really looking at program selection and program evaluation? From a program selection point of view, I just feel that, if a utility is anyway doing something, then I don't think there is any point in bringing that as part of a utility-led DSM program. So, for example, if the utility is anyway solarizing agriculture as part of KUSUM, it's anyway part of their plans, they're anyway shifting loads, then I really do not think that should be part of their demand side management measure, because that is, I would say, fait accompli. In any case, it's a strategy that they have chosen, and it is being also funded by in many cases by KUSUM funds from the central scheme. And it sort of it crowds out other innovative possibilities that is there, because whatever targets you're meeting, you will anyway meet through these programs. The second is, of course, are we really resulting in benefits? What happens when these kind of programs get scaled? One example, the reason I brought up the KUSUM program is, in Maharashtra's case, this was given as a utility-led DSM program as part of the DSM and DF regulations, and the regulator actually disallowed it. The regulator said, when the MSCDC had given it as part of their plans, the regulator said this does not qualify as one of those programs because you're anyway doing it. So I think that's a very good step, and these kind of programs should not be allowed. The other program that's at least happening in Maharashtra's case is that of putting storage in CNI customers' premises. It's very good at a very nascent stage if it's limited. But the other side of it is, if these kind of programs start scaling up, you're essentially providing storage as an asset to a CNI consumer, which is being funded through the ARR. So, there is a kind of an issue there. So I think how we design these programs, what are the different aspects that we're looking at really matter. The other part of it is, how do we monitor and look at the effectiveness? I think many of these regulations have very clear ideas of effectiveness, but one tool that you're using for resource adequacy studies, which are your production cost models, they're very good at looking at the effectiveness of DSM programs, because you can really see what kind of interventions are needed. You can have different scenarios, you can see the cost reduction, and this is something that all utilities anyway have to use for their resource adequacy studies, actually looking at system cost impact. And how it affects planning in the future, and what is the potentiality for these programs. There's a clear case for using RA studies even to look at evaluation of DSM programs. And I'll stop with that. Thanks.
Thank you. And now with this, I will come to Mahesh sir. Mahesh sir, so it's an overarching question is to like what for demand flexibility or demand response. So what is the way forward? Means encapsulating the current means the historical as well as the current landscape, and what are the emerging requirements for the future?
Okay, am I audible compared to the previous?
Yes, it's better, sir. Thank
Great,
you, sir.
thank you so much, and sorry for the earlier glitch. So I think the regulations that have already been notified in the states of Maharashtra, Karnataka, Rajasthan already allude to something called as demand flexibility portfolio obligation, starting with around 1.5% in case of Maharashtra in the first year, ramping up to 3.5% in the fifth year, and that's an excellent signal that the regulator is providing. And that is definitely a way forward, wherein we actually need to keep watching what was the previous year's peak and how much of that can be sort of met through the demand flexibility. And Anne actually talked about several good things, and a couple of things that I just want to elaborate and take those things forward. First and foremost is, let's imagine a state of Maharashtra where you have a 1.5% demand flexibility portfolio obligation amounting to somewhere close to, say, 1,000 megawatt. Now, if we do an AC program, we'll have to and aim to get, say, 1 kilowatt of saving for a period of, say, half an hour or 1 hour max. We need to have 10 lakh consumers participating in that. But at the same instance, if we focus on public water works or lift irrigation schemes, we are looking at something close to 100 schemes of around 10 megawatt each. And that is something which is absolutely doable. And kudos to the public utilities in Maharashtra. They already are in the process of rolling out a lift irrigation scheme and the public water works based scheme, demand flexibility initiative, and that is definitely going to pave way. I also agree with Anne that for the large commercial and industrial consumers, price signal is important, but then we also have to revise our pricing philosophy and the tariff philosophy itself. We really do not have a critical peak pricing in India right now. So it's only a TOD structure. In my personal opinion, it actually leads to some kind of heuristics. You know what's going to happen 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and at midnight. So it's also absolutely important to have some kind of a time-based tariffs which are variable prices announced one day ahead or two ahead. And I think India will reach that situation maybe in another 4 to 5 years. But I think that's a very important aspect as well, wherein we can work with the CNI consumers. I'll make two more last points. One is aggregators. We have evaluated what is the market size for an aggregator to respond to AC initiative or a large scale public water works or EV initiative. Unto itself, aggregators benefit cost are very suboptimal. But if you really if you really sort of put the existing system providers and system integrators who are working with the DISCOMs for meter data management systems and so on and so forth. And if you add a layer which is of demand flexibility, I think that is something which is sort of already doable. And then I strongly feel that we need to definitely look at some of the existing service providers in the utility system, especially the metering part of it, as well as the power procurement functions, to have demand flexibility as an added responsibility. So that's absolutely important. And I think we cannot ignore the need for a very, very robust load research. Most of the states in India right now are leaning on load research that was carried out like 10 to 15 years ago. And the peak demand is shifting. For example, take a city of Mumbai. The peak demand in most of the residential and the mixed-use feeders is actually now hitting at midnight. So it's clearly speaking, it's a air conditioning load. So we can't really design any kind of tariff philosophy based on what we know as the peaking load, which was in the evening time or in the afternoon time. So I think there has to be like a constant effort to keep understanding what is a load profile at the end use level. And I'll just stop by saying that I feel extremely optimistic about demand flexibility really bringing that system benefit, because now we are looking at also increasing the consumption. And I think Anne used a very important word, which was net peak demand. And let's not deviate our attention from the net peak demand, because we have a lot of renewables, and demand flexibility will provide an opportunity to absorb very low cost, very high amounts of renewables. I'll pause there. Thanks a lot, Puneet. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was a very engaging discussions and some very, very valuable insights as well as experiences shared by the panelists. We have a very limited time, so there are a lot of questions being asked in the chat, and we will figure out a way to communicate these questions to the panelists and to respond back to the participants. We will take some of the important questions, and one question is addressed to Sajin. Sajin, what for the community level battery storage, how the billing and tariff allocation would happen? Means there are few questions and you can take choice to answer whichever. Would it be operated by utility or by the households? Do we have a DT level hosting capacity studies in Kerala to identify where storage should be installed? And the second one would be what are the key challenges? Kerala is also facing challenges on net zero emissions. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah.
Just before you start, we only have 3 minutes. So.
Okay, let me be quick on this. The community level storage, the question is how the billing and tariff allocation would happen. That is not yet been concrete, and the regulatory commission will definitely come up with the tariff. And would it be operated by the utility or by the, right now in the pilots, what we are planning is to do by the utility, definitely. Then we are trying to put it to the households, like they can also do it. That is there. Then do we have DT level hosting capacity studies in Kerala? Yeah. We are actually doing a lot of work on that. And in fact, we are working with WRI on a very specific project called Store and I think WRI can better elaborate on that. And another question was on the net zero aspect. So net zero, Kerala is targeting 2050 as a carbon neutral state. And we already have a document draft is ready how to achieve the 2050 net zero. Basically become a carbon neutral state, and 2040 is our target to become Kerala as a renewable energy state, purely run by renewable energy grid. The only concern that we are having is every time when we require power, we are actually taking from the other states. Like that is the requirement. At present, we are trying to increase the renewable energy capacity here to a very high level, considering every possible aspects and every new energy sources that can be put into the picture, including the storage aspect. So when it comes to Kerala's boundary, when you put a GHG boundary as Kerala as a one inventory, we don't have much emission. The major emission that is being contributed by the power that we are procuring from other states, which has been run by coal. Apart from that, Kerala's major emission contributions from the transportation, 48 to 49%. When our vehicles are being, right now we have 14 to 15% as the penetration of electric vehicles in the last quarter also. It has been increasing very rapidly. 15%, we are expecting 20 to 25% in the upcoming years. So that when we have the vehicles electrified, so the emission potential will be very less. Only to ensure that we have the source has been renewable. Apart from that, I don't think we have that kind of a difficulty. It will come in the future, others. So there is a solid plan to make Kerala carbon neutral. Thank you. I hope I have cleared
Thank you.
the
I
points.
would like to, I think few seconds are remaining. Sumedha, can you close the webinar? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thanks to all our panelists and also our participants. Very engaging conversation on the chat, and we apologize for not being able to cover so many questions live. There were questions pointed at pretty much all the people on the panel. As Puneet said, we would try to get you responses via email to some of these questions. Very important, pertinent questions. Thank you so much for the audience engagement. And yeah, once again, we thank all the speakers and participants for joining us and contributing to such a rich discussion. We would like to end by inviting you to join us at ACE, which is WRI India Energy Program's annual flagship event, Accelerating Clean Energy, happening at IIT Bombay this year in partnership with the Global Energy and Sustainability Hub at IIT Bombay on the June 23rd and 24th. More details will be shared by my colleagues in the chat. I also want to acknowledge a few important resources in the chat, including the ETPI resources, the recording link of the first webinar, relevant reports and publications, and also a link to learn more about ACE and register for ACE, including the agenda. Finally, we hope that today's discussion helped deepen understanding of how demand-side measures and regulatory innovation can support DISCOMs in managing future demand growth and accelerating India's clean energy transition. We thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, which is the last webinar of the series. Have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, Sumedha.
Thanks a
Thank you.
lot.
Thank you.